Hi, happy homeschoolers. This is your host, Melody Gillum. I'm here to tell you about a huge savings opportunity. This Cyber Monday, you can get 40% off all Transcript Maker plans at www.transcriptmaker.com. Just enter the code CYBER21. That's CYBER21 in all caps. Afford that extra gift this holiday season with the money you save. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the Happy Homeschooler Podcast, a digital support group for everyone interested in a learning lifestyle. I'm your host, Melody.
I'm your co-host, Holly.
And today we're joined by our favorite guest who will be joining us as a full host in the new year, Jennifer Jones.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Jen.
So what have you been up to, Jennifer, since we talked to you last?
Well, I've been traveling more. I actually just got back today from a trip that we went on with several homeschool families. There were about 19 of us. So we went to the Grand Canyon for the week, and it was amazing.
I have always wanted to go to the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, we loved it.
You have to go.
This was my second trip there, but my children don't remember. They were too little when we went last time. So it was really great to see them seeing it for the first time.
Oh, that's so much fun.
It's so hard to take in.
It is. And when you're there, it doesn't look real. It takes a lot of just looking at it over and over to realize it's a real thing there in front of you.
You know, my daughter said that. She said it's so beautiful. It's like looking at a painting, but you're in the painting. And
yes.
It's just more than your mind can take in.
Mm-hmm.
How fun. So you've been really busy then if you just got in today. And Holly, what have you been doing?
Well, you know, Thanksgiving's coming up so soon and the holiday season. And it starts to get crazy for us because we have 4 birthdays from around Thanksgiving to right before Christmas. So not only,
wow.
that was a cosmic stroke of luck. I didn't plan that, obviously. So yeah, we have birthdays every 2 weeks until Christmas, and it's fun. But it makes me always look forward to New Year's Eve as my special holiday where I can just have fun and I have nobody's gifts to get together or yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, yeah, Melody, what about you?
A little bit of the same, getting ready for Thanksgiving, but the 2 adult children that we've been sharing this house with moved out and just this last weekend. And so we've been doing that whole thing of where is everything? Because the house is, you know, some things are here, some things are there, and finding the recipes. And my daughter's like, where's the recipe for this? And making copies of things. So we're getting geared up for Thanksgiving while we're moving some of them out and then getting geared up to move ourselves at the end of the year. So I'm sort of running around like a chicken with my head cut off. There's a lot going on. So unexpected things keep happening, which is just par for the course. But mostly, you know, we learn to flex quite a bit. I just have flexed a lot more than usual. And I'm looking forward to like Thanksgiving, sit down, enjoy everybody's company before I have to move on to the next big task. So it's just a busy season for everyone.
It is.
I'm really excited about our topic today, what is unschooling, because we have Jennifer here who's like the expert on that topic. I'm just really excited to find out about your journey and how you came to homeschooling, or if you started there, and if you want to explain to our listeners what unschooling is all about.
So have you ever unschooled? I was wondering if I know both of you do more traditional kind of schooling at home.
We typically unschool in the summer. Like my kiddos are out of the house now, but we had our more structured learning time throughout this, well, kind of this school year, but that was flexible too.
Your school year,
were long, we kind of schooled all year long, but there were long seasons where I took my cues from what they were interested in learning. And
weren't your kids involved in like Delight directed studies, really child-centered studies? in the summer?
For some time. Yeah, in the summer, we would do delight directed studies, or they would be wanting to learn about something, and maybe there wasn't a good chunk of time to do it
Mm-hmm.
during the regular studies, and we would just go with it and, find activities that supported their learning, or they might
Yeah.
start a big project, and we would let that be the focus of everything. A lot of those things were outdoor things, like they were building things or digging things or creating,
Right.
you know, structures in the woods, and I would just let them go with that. So I didn't worry as much about, not that I ever really worried about that, but some of the other things could take a back seat for that little
Right.
season,
Mm-hmm.
and we would just milk that topic for all it was worth. Mostly when you just let them run with it, they just learn so much because they're
Absolutely.
the ones, they have the motivation, and they're pushing or lead, like a locomotive running down the track.
I totally agree with that. I think that the reason I asked you that question is because I think a lot of people who do more traditional schooling at home are scared of the idea of unschooling, or the term itself is scary or foreign to them. But I think most homeschooling families do dabble in unschooling a lot of times, like during the holiday season, and or
Hmm.
if you're busy with something else, that you do tend to slow down at some points and let the kids kind of lead the learning. And I feel like most veteran homeschool families do that and don't realize that it's really stepping a foot into unschooling, and it's not that scary.
So let's talk about what unschooling is and why people might be nervous about it. Jennifer, tell us what unschooling is.
Sure. So, unschooling, like most of homeschooling, has a lot of different definitions. Obviously, you can do it your own way. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But most people, when they hear the term, think that unschooling means you don't do school, that your kids are not learning and there's no schooling going on at all. And that's just not the case. It's more about being child led learning. And people do that in different ways. When I started with homeschooling, I was very traditional. We sat down and did schoolwork and, like they do in public school, because I didn't know any different. And then I met people who unschooled, and it terrified me. That's why I brought this up, because the
Really?
people I met were what you call radical unschoolers. And they basically let their kids lead the way in every area, not just in what they're learning, but what they're doing for the day, what they're eating, how they're dressing, everything was child led. And I watched a family that I knew closely doing this, and I did not understand that concept at all. I felt like they needed more guidance, personally for my kids. Um, but I started learning that there were ways to incorporate that and become unschoolers without being radical unschoolers, which, by the way, isn't a bad thing either. It works for a lot of people. And it's 100% trust your child and follow their lead kind of thing. But there's also other levels, basically, I guess I would say, of unschooling. Relaxed homeschooling and eclectic homeschooling, if you've heard those terms before,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
they're more parent-led learning styles more than radical unschooling, but they're not traditional schooling, and it can really incorporate any style of learning. But the point is that it's not traditional. You're not sitting down and learning in a traditional way. For those types of schools, there's also, and I just heard this term recently, but this is kind of what I've done. It's called intentional unschooling, and it means you are kind of guiding your child's learning, but you're their facilitator, basically. So it's from the side. So it's like you notice your child is interested in something. So then you go get books about that topic and, put them around the house and let them
Mm.
discover them and read them on their own. Or you supply things that you realize they're interested in so that they can follow up on it on their own. So you're allowing them to make their choices and follow what they're interested in, but you're supplying steps along the way that enhance that learning.
And
And
I would have described you as an intentional unschooler. That is a perfect
yeah,
term because you have a plan. You have some ideas of what you think would be good for your kids to know.
absolutely.
But the way you implement that is a lot different than someone with a traditional textbook approach. Yeah.
Right. And I feel like what I do with my kids is I allow them to decide how they're pursuing their learning. And then I just follow up on that. I just give them the tools that they need for that. And I would include in that project-based homeschooling is a lot of what I have done in unschooling as well. And I can give you an example of what that looks like. Let's say your kids are cooking something and they're all working together doing a cooking project. Well, what I would do is we would work all our math and things into that. And again, I think most homeschoolers do this anyways and don't realize that it's the same thing we're doing in unschooling, but they didn't ask to learn how to multiply fractions that day, but it comes up in like, we're going to triple this recipe, and they don't know how to do that. So then they ask, hey, how do we do this? And then I show them an example, and then it's real life hands-on learning right that moment. For my family, that's really worked well. It's more fluid, it's more organic. And when they're interested in something, I feel like they pick it up more. I think we do as adults too.
Sure. So unschooling at its root has a philosophy. And would you say the philosophy is that kids will ask for the knowledge they need? I used to know a family who unschooled, and I remember the mom saying, she had a lot of kids. I remember the mom saying one time, yeah, so-and-so, he decided he wanted to go to college. And so he came to me and said, well, I want to go to college. I need this math. And that's when they started working on it. And he was
Absolutely.
like 15. So it is like trusting your kid that they have some ideas about what they want to do at its more radical part.
Yes.
Was there somebody you read or any people, who had books about unschooling?
Oh, absolutely. Well, most homeschoolers are familiar with John Holt, but pretty much anything John Holt has written discusses basically the concept that kids are natural learners on their own, that they desire to learn things and they want knowledge. And if you just take a little bit of a step back, they'll ask you when they're ready. They'll let you know when they need your help or when they want to learn more. And so any of his books are based on that philosophy. Those are great. I read a book called Free to Learn by Peter Gray. He actually kind of doesn't like unschooling, but the book is interesting because he's following Sudbury schools and what they do in Sudbury schools. And it talks about the philosophy of how to learn in a child-led learning environment. And it's very close to what unschoolers do, what many unschoolers do. So that was interesting. There's also a book called Radical Unschooling by Dana Martin. She kind of tells how she does it with her family. And then there's some project-based books that I've read. And one of them that I really liked is by Lori Pickert. And she kind of steps you through how to do project-based homeschooling, which is really an idea where your kid says, hey, I want to do this. And then you set them up to be successful at that.
Yeah, that's like if your kid wants to have a lemonade stand, right?
Yes, okay. Or bigger.
Right,
like my daughter, 2 years ago, refurnished our van so she could travel in it. And that was, she was still a high schooler at the time. And that was a project. It was an ongoing year-long project. And when she said she wanted to do it, we said, okay, let's figure out how to do it. What do you need? What do you need to learn first?
Right.
You have to learn electronics and all kinds of things. And so she, stepped up and learned all the things she needed to know to be able to do that on her own.
It was really fun to watch her, all those photographs that were put on Facebook of the progress. Yeah. It was really amazing.
Well, it's so much fun when they're interested in something like that, because my son decided he was going to build his first car and did. Mm-hmm. And so it was the same sort of thing. It's like, okay, he's got this project. So we were simultaneously intentionally homeschooling and continuing with our unit-based studies as well. So I find that it's something, like you said, people are incorporating this into their lifestyle, whether they call it intentional unschooling or not. It's just part of living a learning lifestyle.
Yeah, well, I sometimes don't like the use of the term unschooling because I do see in the homeschooling community anyways, a lot of people are turned off by that term and they think it means something really negative. And it's, so all these other terms that kind of explain it more what you're doing are helpful, I think.
I agree. So you started off traditional. How did you get to where you are now? What was the impetus?
So I have a large family. I'm sure I was pregnant when we started homeschooling and I was exhausted. And I had a lot of little children and I was trying to do, I went to public school my whole life. My husband went to public school and I was trying to kind of, copy that at home because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. And really it all kind of fell apart because I just couldn't keep up with it for all my kids. At that time I was trying to do all the different ages and different ways and it was just too much for me. And then probably like my last month of that pregnancy, I was like, okay, whatever, you guys are going to watch educational TV for the next month.
Right.
And because I couldn't do it, I was just too tired and too overwhelmed. But from that, I saw like that they were learning stuff without me. Like when I just took a step back, they were doing all kinds of learning without me even being involved. And so from that point, which was pretty early on, the first year, I think I started dropping a lot of stuff, and I kept some of the traditional stuff for a while. Then over the years, it became less and less traditional schooling. And even now, my kids still, like by choice, they still participate in classes and co-ops and things like that. But the whole principle of it is it's something they're interested in doing, or they've decided they need it for some reason that they're pursuing. So it's not I don't lay out their schedule and say you need to take this class, this class, this class. I meet with my kids every year individually, and we talk about, like, so what do you want to do? And that's basically where we start at every meeting, is what do you want to do? And sometimes those ideas are, to me, silly, or unimportant, or not the direction I expect them to go in. But I don't feel like it's my job to tell them that. I feel like I am really a facilitator for the things they say they want to do. And when they change their mind, we go right with that, and we go to the next thing that they're interested in. And along the way, because they're having to make things happen for themselves, they learn math, and they learn reading and writing and all of the typical topics that they need to learn throughout that.
So Jennifer, when you sit down, you said you sit down with each one to plan. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of walk us through that? Like, what is that process? I'm a planner girl, so like I do well if I have a plan. Some people don't care; they just fly by the seat of their pants. But what does that look like for you with each of your kids? I'm guessing it depends on the age of the kid.
Absolutely, yeah.
Walk us through that a little bit.
So when my kids were younger, it was really just a little fun meeting, and I'd ask them, like, so what are you interested in right now? Which I think a lot of parents don't ask that question of their kids, because you think you already know, like you're watching them and you see what they're doing. But when kids are given an opportunity to actually tell you what they want to learn, when you ask them those questions, they sometimes really surprise you with that. So I always just started off with, so what are you interested in right now? What do you want to do? And those were really open-ended conversations. With my little ones, it was silly stuff like, I want to build a Lego tower. And then we would sit down and discuss, like, okay, well, how are you going to do that? What do you need? How do we make that happen? And just go from there. But as my kids got older and they started having goals, I guess we're big on goals and how are you going to get there to make it happen. And so that kind of changed the conversation with my kids in our planning, as I would start off with, so what's your goal for this year or for this month or for this week? And what do you need to do to get there? And that's where, as they got older, more traditional schooling actually started coming back in on their own. Because, for example, I have a daughter who's in college now that wants to go to medical school, and she's been interested in anatomy for years and years and years, and she kind of had this path that she knew she wanted to go on. And so she realized that she had to take certain math classes or certain science classes or things like that for her transcripts so that she could get into the program she wanted to get into. So then that was part of our discussion and planning, is what do you need to do to get there? And then she would go find ways to study those classes on her own or ask me for help if she needed it. So they're really open-ended planning. There is planning involved, though, and as they're what I have called as their facilitator, I am the one that's responsible for helping them get the things they need to make it happen.
Well, I love that idea of asking them what they're interested in. I feel like there are so many opportunities to really get to know your kids, because like you said, we think we know, but when you ask them and then listen, it just forms such close bonds, because then you're a partner with them in their learning.
Yeah, and it's exciting, and they get excited about it when they're given those opportunities. They really do, especially if you're not telling them no. And I know that sounds funny, but a lot of my actual meetings, I always call them teacher meetings, and we go out and we have a coffee or something together, and they bring a notebook and they tell me what's in their notebook, and I write down all their plans, and they enjoy it. It's fun, but it always leads to bigger things too, because I don't tell them no at those meetings. I would always am like, yes, we can do that. Let's make it happen. Because part of also with me with unschooling is that sometimes their ideas aren't good, and that's okay. Like they learn that through the process, and that's a whole other learning process that's great for them.
Oh, it's important to learn from that kind of a, like,
Yes.
okay, let's try, but it's kind of like learning from a mistake, and it's a safe place to do that at home
Yes.
with your parents. Like, we're going to go out on a limb here and let's try that. But then, like, there's not that much loss because you're home and there's
Right.
like a safety net. But I know some
Right.
of the way out there ideas that my children have had, they come to their own end safely.
Yes, and that's what I kind of, it's more important that it ends of their own doing than of me saying, no, you can't do that. It's not going to work out. It's more important to me that they figure it out. And sometimes they surprise me. Sometimes there's things they want to
Yeah.
do that, I don't think they can do, and then they make it happen.
So you haven't come on a situation where you had to tell them no. Like my son wants to be a YouTuber, and I'm
Hmm.
like, I'm not comfortable with you being in social media at this age. But
Right.
I will get you the tools you can learn how to use a camera, stuff like
So
that.
that's exactly what I would have done. You didn't tell him no. You told him there's certain guidelines he needs to follow that to make it okay for him right now. And then you embraced his idea by giving him the tools he needs to follow that dream. So, yeah, that's exactly how I would have handled it. I would let them know my feelings on it and then find other ways to achieve the same goals that he's interested in.
Okay, good. I don't feel so bad now because I was like, he had a video camera he was playing with and it broke. So
Hmm.
now he's interested in replacing that. But yeah, I was like, well, there's a lot to learn before it's safe for you to get on social media.
Absolutely. He could
Yeah.
spend years learning it before he's ready for that stuff.
Right. Now, I am curious. So, when your children were young, did you sit down to teach them to read or any of those kind of things we
Some of
typically
them.
see? Yeah. But I mean, was it your idea, like, oh, I think you need to learn to read, or did you kind of wait till they were asking you questions? I'm just
I
curious how
I
that.
did both, and it really depended on the child themselves and how they were doing. One of my kids, one of my older sons who's autistic doesn't grasp phonics, and so he really wanted to read, but he wasn't able to comprehend really how the phonics worked. So we did really intensive programs together to help him get to reading, and that was very structured. But it was because he had a desire, he wanted to read, and so I set it up so that we could work on that. Some of my kids, my youngest, I have never for a single second taught him almost anything but definitely not with reading, and he just did it. So I kind of, you also have to read your child. Each
Mhm.
child's different, so when they need extra help, there's no rules of unschooling that say you can't help your child, you can't
I would
assist
hope
them in
not.
learning. So yeah, so I just kind of, if somebody is struggling in something that they need at the moment to learn how to do, then I'll help set them up with a curriculum or something like that that will help. But we also drop things if they're not working, which is very important.
Right. It's like I've told my kids before, if you're reading a book and it's just not working, you can set it aside. You don't have
Mhm.
to always finish every project. And then even as
Yes.
adults, we'll start something to dabble in it and see, do we like this well enough to overcome the hurdles? If not, if you find out it's not your thing, it's okay to set it aside
Right.
and just chalk it up to a lesson learned, or now you know more about it than you did before, or maybe you just want to set it aside and come back to it
Mhm.
later.
Yeah. I get asked
Sometimes,
about reading quite a lot. Kids all learn how to read at different ages. They're not exactly set to learn at the same age everyone else in a class learns. So I think just patience is a big part of it.
what about math? I've had some people, when I would mention unschooling to them in the past, just say that they thought it would be impossible to do math. But there's so
Hmm.
much in the course of like living your life. But I know that there are some parts of math you need to learn in sequence. Has that been a problem, or do
Okay.
you have materials you like to use?
I would say math is probably for my house was like the last holdout on what we're going to learn traditionally, because I wasn't as comfortable with giving up the traditional math learning progression as I was with other things. But eventually I really gave over to like that doesn't make sense. They still learn the math the same way they're learning everything else. And when they learn it because they need it, they understand it and remember it. So like pre-high school level math, we don't do anything formal. They go to some co-op classes where they play math games. We do a lot of games for math.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, not them saying, hey, I want to do math. It's them saying, hey, let's play a game. And I know as their mom and their teacher that they're learning math while we're doing it, but they don't necessarily see it that way. So a lot of game playing, things like shopping and cooking and figuring out,
Measuring. Yeah.
yes, or like we go on trips a lot. So figuring out the mileage and the things like that. So all of that's very organic, everyday life math, and really some of the most useful math skills that they're going to use the rest of their life. When they
Right,
get
'cause
to
you're
high
using it
school,
in
right?
context, math in context of
Yes,
life.
yes. And then when they get to high school level and they've decided that they need math for a certain something they're pursuing, then they do it on their own and they've used, online programs. A couple of them have done classes, but I feel like when they're ready and they need it, they can learn it just like you or I could learn it. If I needed to go brush up on algebra right now, I could go online and I could take
Mm-hmm.
a class and I would know how to do algebra. So we don't really treat it any differently than other subjects now. It's just most of my kids have done formal math classes as high school students because they've decided that they need it. But that's on their own.
That makes sense. And like you said, a lot of the math you need, you're going to learn in the course of life. We've been reading
Yes.
Farmer Boy, and we've been reading, I don't know, we've probably been reading 6 chapters, and nobody's at school. They're doing all
hmm
this stuff, right? They're planting
Yes.
crops, they're harvesting, they're figuring out all this stuff. They're doing a lot of stuff, and they still haven't gone to school because they didn't go to school that much back then.
Right.
But by the time little Almanzo was an adult, he had all of the math he
All the
needed to
skills.
live his life. And you're right. Like I always told my kids, you need to take algebra because it's good exercise for your brain.
hmm
And a lot of them looked like they were college bound.
hmm
And I'm not a math person, so I was like, I feel more comfortable with these little guidelines in the form of textbooks. But typically we don't use algebra that much in our day-to-day lives. I
Right.
think I use geometry somewhat more.
hmm
I'll say, oh, that was this kind of an angle, or you need to do this thing or that thing. But yeah, if we're
But
living
when you need that, even as an adult, if like for example, if you decided to build something and you didn't know how, you can go learn how to do it.
right, knowing how to find information when you need it
Yes.
is more important than knowing all the information. I think
Right. Or how
Einstein
to
said
use the
something like
Well,
tools.
that.
and you
Yeah.
can't know all the information either. That's
No.
why, like, one of our major homeschool goals was learning how to learn.
Absolutely.
Because if you know how to learn something, like you said, you can go take a class. And the other part of that is when you're ready and you need it, you are older and can learn it more quickly. So
Right.
you're not really losing any time. You're just gaining information as you go and skills because you're really showing them how to facilitate their own learning,
hmm
how to set goals. All of this are really important life skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jennifer, you mentioned your youngest daughter wanted to go to college, and you were working on a transcript, and she needed a
hmm
transcript. So that makes me think, and I'm sure our listeners are wondering, okay, you're unschooling. Do you keep grades? How do you keep track of what your kids have learned so you can translate it later into some kind of document to
Yeah.
provide? Yeah, what do you
So
do?
I don't give grades. I've never given grades and we don't do testing or anything like that. But what I do is I kind of keep notes on what they're learning. So when they were younger, I actually had like a notebook that I would write down. And for me, for my own well being, when we first started, it was like, okay, what did they learn today? And I would write it down, just to make sure they were actually learning while they were doing nothing. They were doing tons of things, of course.
Mhm.
And that kind of, I had to do less of that as I got older because I realized that I'm with them, I'm watching them learn, I see what they're learning. So as far as keeping formal records later on when they needed them for a high school transcript or something, it was more of an exercise of going back to the meeting with my kids thing. And we sat down and we met and we said, okay, we looked at like a traditional high school transcript and we went through the subjects and went, okay, what did you learn about biology? What do you know about biology and how did you learn that over the years? And then we sat and discussed it together and wrote down all the things we, remembered that she had done in those areas, which turned out to be so much more than I thought going into it, you know.
Mhm.
And we really kind of did that for each subject. So each traditional subject, so that when we did list it on a transcript, we listed them as traditional subjects and I gave grades. And the way when I have to give a grade for a transcript for my kids, I've done this for 6 of them now. So when I have to give a grade is my philosophy on grading them is that they learn to mastery. So I give them A's if I feel that they've completed the work for a topic. I could even at some point go through like a biology textbook and go, okay, did you learn this? Did you learn this? Did you learn this? And they've learned it all. So then I give them an A. And that's really how I approached grading and the transcripts. And then as far as like going to college, unschoolers can definitely do that. And some of the schools that she applied to asked homeschoolers in general had to submit extra records and more class descriptions. So in the class descriptions, I explained how she learned each subject in the non-traditional ways and included all the information about how she did that and also information about how I came to the grades that I gave her.
That makes perfect sense because what they want to know is that the student is prepared for college level work. They don't
Absolutely.
necessarily care how the student got that information.
Right. And you wouldn't explain that if they went to school. They're not asking you, "Oh, what textbook did you use?" That's they're not interested
Right.
in that.
Do you
Um,
keep a list of resources? So, for example, or I know that in the case of your youngest daughter, I know she went to some interesting like workshops or internships or things. So, do you have
mhm.
that information logged somewhere?
Yeah, no, I really don't. It goes back to us just sitting down and discussing it and remembering what she did. And then we'd remember, oh yeah, you went and did that anatomy lab. And then I'd go find what was the name of it, when was it, and things like that. And then use some of those descriptions for their classes that they offered were included in the transcript. And I suppose if I had kept more detailed records, then when I made the transcripts, it would have been easier. But I think it would have been the same process. I don't feel like it's necessary. I feel like for unschoolers who do want to keep records, I think you need to be careful that you're not thinking about it as a checklist of my kid needs to know these things, because that's kind of opposed to what the idea of unschooling is, because you kind of need to let go of the idea of what they're supposed to know and kind of go with what do they want to know
Hmm.
instead. One of the big things that I've been asked over the years by a lot of homeschoolers and people who are interested in homeschooling in general is if it's legal to unschool. I think the concept's so foreign to
Really?
everybody. But
I
yes,
guess they have in their imagination that you're not doing anything.
I think that goes back to just the word itself, unschooling, of them thinking like your child doesn't learn anything. And then obviously that must be illegal, right? um, but it's like any other homeschooling. It depends on the state, obviously, that you're in. Each state has different homeschooling laws. But, for example, here in Texas, with our homeschooling laws, you can homeschool any way you choose to homeschool as long as you fit in the very few requirements the state has of you. It doesn't matter. Now, some of the states require record keeping as homeschooling law. So obviously you would have to find a way to keep records in those states. But for the most part, nobody's coming and saying, well, how did you do your math today? Or
Hmm.
you really are free to choose how you teach. So unschooling is included in that.
Unschooling is a perfect way to tailor education to a particular child's personality and interests and
Yes.
just that whole idea of their bent, like what are you gifted and talented for? And
Yes.
then to cultivate those interests and give them skills they need. And like you
Hmm.
said before, if you know how to learn, that's one of those things about getting into college. Anyone who is that involved in their own education is ready for college because
Right.
the responsibilities on your shoulders in college. Your professor is not calling you to make sure you did your homework. And so unschooling in the way that you're doing it intentionally is really good preparation.
I think so too.
You've opened my eyes. I don't think I'm, brave enough to do unschooling completely, but I think what you're doing is amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us and helping us to learn more about it.
You're so welcome.
We're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsor, and when we come back, we have a special Thanksgiving surprise. Oh dear, what's wrong?
I'm so stressed. I'm taking down Halloween decorations. I've got a plan for Thanksgiving, Christmas shopping. I've got Christmas decorations to get out of the attic. I've got to plan my Christmas meal. And my child is graduating, and I need a transcript.
You should use Transcript Maker. It's an online service that allows you to make professional high school transcripts from the comfort of your own home.
Oh, I don't have time to learn to use Excel.
Oh, you don't need to. Transcript Maker can calculate GPA for you, so you don't have to waste time doing a bunch of laborious calculations.
I won't be at home very much. I've got to tour farm, so I know where I'm getting my turkey.
Transcript Maker keeps your transcript in the cloud in case you need to edit or access on the go, even on a turkey farm.
Okay, but I can't spend a lot of money this time of year. I've got to buy brand new cars with big red bows on them for my whole family.
Thankfully, Transcript Maker offers a 14-day free trial, so you can give it a test drive and see what you think. And listeners of the Happy Homeschooler podcast can save 20% off their subscription with our exclusive coupon code, HAPPY. HAPPY in all caps. And don't forget, this Cyber Monday you can get 40% off all Transcript Maker plans at www.transcriptmaker.com. Just enter the code CYBER21, that's CYBER21 in all caps. Head to www.transcriptmaker.com and get rid of some of that stress today.
Thank goodness for Transcript Maker.
Simply better transcripts. Thanksgiving is in 2 days if you're listening to this the day it comes out. And here at the end of the podcast, we want to share a few things that we're thankful for this year. Holly, what are you thankful for this year?
I'm really thankful for the technology we have that enables us to interact with each other no matter where we are, and to help people no matter where they are, and to interact with our kids. I have kids that live out of state. And I can still, watch movies with them and hang out with them. And so I'm really thankful for technology. Jennifer, would you like to share with us what you're thankful for this year?
Sure. I just got back from this big trip with a bunch of homeschool families, and I'm feeling especially thankful that my family even discovered homeschooling, because it gives us so much freedom to do these things like traveling. And this trip reminded me of how important that is to what we love to do. What about you, Melody?
I am overwhelmed with gratitude, and I'm so thankful for my children who are building us a home. And while it's a stressful time with moving is the pits, but we are moving into this amazing little house that all of my kids have come together to work on and remodel and prepare for us. And I know that homeschooling is a huge part of the way that our family has grown and the way that we are close with each other. And we really are each other's best friends. And so I better stop or I'll just start crying, because I'm just full of gratitude for what it means.
Because of the pandemic, and a lot of the times I didn't get to see my kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's been a huge thing. I think that I like that technology.
Yeah, and because
it's changed for a lot of people this year.
Yeah. Well, and you're close with your kids. And then when you have something that happens where, you can't get together, maybe they're too far away, or there's something going on, and you could still, we played games, and all kinds of stuff online. It's so important, because we all grew these wonderful people that we really like to be around.
Yeah.
Well, the entire podcast production team would also like to thank our listeners who have helped our podcast grow so much in the past year. We couldn't do what we're doing without you listening to our episodes.
If you have any questions, comments, or homeschool news stories, please email us at happyhomeschoolpod@gmail.com.
Like our page and join our group on Facebook at facebook.com/happyhomeschoolpod.
Check out our Instagram at instagram.com/happyhomeschoolpod.
Follow us on Twitter at _homeschoolpod.
And subscribe to the Happy Homeschooler podcast on YouTube. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Melody.
I'm Holly.
And I'm Jennifer.
Happy homeschooling.
Hi, this is your host, Melody Gillum. Thank you for listening to the Happy Homeschooler podcast, a Transcript Maker production. My co-host is Holly Williams-Urbach. This episode was produced by Matthew Bass and edited by Nora Williams. Our graphic design is by Pete Soloway, and our music is by The Great Pangolin. You can find her music on YouTube and Twitter at Kylie Wins. That's Kailey Wins. If you'd like to help our podcast grow, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Or, as always, tell people about us. In fact, this is so silly. In my dream, just before I woke up this morning, I was visiting with cousins that I haven't seen in a long time. And they were talking about homeschooling because they had been listening to the podcast. I think that was really my brain trying to remind me that I had something to do today and I had promised to keep the kids.